Hey, this is Brad Colbert, the Iceman. Welcome to another edition of Carry On Podcast, SITREP version. And today we are going to be catching up on last week's news and events through my lens, which is, after all, why you're here. I'd like to start with one of the obvious ones, and that is the peace agreement between Gaza and Israel, supposed peace agreement, because it doesn't look like it's going to hold very much longer. And I would say by the time you're watching this, it very well may have crumbled. I was well impressed. I will give credit where credit is due to Trump's involvement in brokering what I thought was an unbrokerable, I can verb tense that, agreement between two warring factions, Hamas and the IDF, Israel. I will say that most, if not all, of the human remains have been returned, and that came at quite a price for Israel. 250 prisoners and thousands of other detainees all went back to Gaza, where I am most certain they are going to start trouble up again. And see, here's a thing that I wish more of those wonderful college protesters around the United States understood, is that Hamas doesn't give a shit about controlling or running Palestine. All they want is the destruction of Israel, and that land that they're currently referring to as Palestine and the people that make up their labor pool. The only reason they exist is to provide cannon fodder for that end. I mean, Hamas's entire charter is the destruction of Israel. It's not hyperbole. It's written into their constitution. From the river to the sea isn't saying Palestine will be free from occupation or outside government control. No. What it means is that there's no Israeli state. It's that entire area devoid of Israel. It's gone. So what I'm questioning is what they're going to do next, because I'm pretty sure once they got their peace agreement, I'll put it to you like this. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that their wishes and this chant from the river to the sea, it came true. Tomorrow, the crystal balls aligned and suddenly they had no more Jews. The Israeli state was gone. The very next 60 seconds after they're done celebrating by shooting their weapons into the sky, they're going to look at each other and go, oh, shit, we don't know anything about running a nation state. Do you? No. Do you? No. Habibi, how do we manage sanitation and education? What do we do for income? How do we generate revenue? Do we have any exports? Is there anything that we can provide as a service? And then very shortly, they're going to realize they don't know jack. And the only way that that country is going to continue to even exist is if they find a new threat. So they get rid of Israel, and all they're going to do is go on to, America or whatever else they decide that their zealots label as a threat, external, because without an external threat, they have no legitimacy. The only reason that that country exists is because it is a hate factory. So we have this truce, this ceasefire between Israel and what is the legitimate government of Palestine, Hamas. And it's already starting to crumble. We've had 11 people that were engaged by a IDF tank round. Supposedly a bus that was moving from one point to another. It was misidentified as a threat, or maybe it was a bona fide threat. I don't know. I'm not on the ground. And it was destroyed. And I will tell you firsthand, we have engaged people that probably were not a threat, but in the heat of the moment, perceived as a threat, and we wiped them out. And that is unfortunate. It is also the fog of war. It's the uncertainty of live combat when you have seconds to decide whether the person or persons that are in front of you are a threat, and either make that decision and live or choose wrong and die. So yeah, the Israelis destroyed what was later found out to be 11 civilians, and that's unfortunate. And then on the flip side, Hamas is already providing lots of excitement across the yellow line by launching attacks against Israeli soldiers there. So both sides have ostensibly breached the ceasefire. And as soon as Hamas emerged from all of their tunnels and their caves, where they've spent the last 2 years basically hiding, because they do not have any way to fight a symmetrical war, they immediately started killing anyone who was a challenge to their power during the last 2 years, which is exactly what you would expect from these douchebags. So I'm sure everyone saw the YouTube video, or at least heard about it. I think it was 8 or 9 civilians that were handcuffed, lined up, and unceremoniously shot in the fucking face for the egregious crime of challenging Hamas's ironclad rule. And they're continuing to do that, solidifying power. What took place during the last 2 years was small pockets of, for lack of a better word, neighborhood watch, trying to protect their neighborhoods from threats and looting and rival gangs. And Hamas is not having it. They are going around and systematically dismantling them. But you do have pockets. You have pockets of these, gangs or neighborhood watch or local militia, whatever word you'd like to use, behind the yellow line, and they are going to provide a bona fide challenge to Hamas's legitimacy. And I hope that they do. And this is an opportunity for some of our clandestine intelligence services to quietly help fund and provide some soft intelligence, maybe some hard targeting, I don't know, because you have a potential to maybe dismantle Hamas from proxy groups like some of these militias and gangs. I don't know. It's a long shot, and I'm certainly not the only one in the room that's thought of this, but it is definitely going to be an interesting couple of weeks watching this truce between Israel and Hamas. I personally hold out zero hope because while the Israelis may have played it pretty heavy-handed against the Palestinians, they can at least show restraint. They can back off. They can retrograde their military infrastructure out of Gaza and wait and see what happens. Hamas can't, because as I said, they can't govern themselves. They have no fucking clue how to manage their own people, provide for their welfare, their security. And so without an existential threat to continue to galvanize the people, they don't have anything. They don't. I would like to see the Egyptian entryway opened up to allow some aid into that part of the world. I'm definitely the last one that wants to see women and children suffer. So I would hope that that is opened up soon and a lot of this gets resolved. But I'm also not Pollyannish. I don't for an instant think that it's going to last. If I had a crystal ball and was looking forward into the future, my guess, cynical as it may be, Israel is going to go right back in and probably systematically dismantle Hamas. And it's going to be brutal and ugly. So that's that on that issue. So pivoting to something domestic, for those of you that haven't been paying attention, since the Eisenhower administration, there was, a group of resident press inside the nation's largest office building, also known as the Pentagon. Lovely installation. If you get a chance, I highly recommend checking it out. It is a marvel of architectural engineering. It is also where the press has been, as I said, since the Eisenhower administration, and we had currently roughly about 100 journalists that were working inside of the building, and their sole charter was to provide information about Pentagon and Department of War comings and goings, new defense initiatives, new policy changes, personnel changes. And it wasn't always the sexy stuff. Sometimes it was the ugly fraud, waste, and abuse. Sometimes it was people who leaked secrets and were caught. There's a lot that goes on in that building, considering the office manages some 1.2 million of our Americans. In May of 2025, Pete Hegseth started hinting that there was going to be tighter controls on the press inside of that building, tighter controls on their access in and around. Now, a couple of things about that space. The majority of the Pentagon is what we would refer to as a SCIF. And a SCIF is essentially an area that is no electronics are inside. It usually has a controlled access keypad, double doors in some cases, and it's compartmentalized. So if you don't have a need to know, you're not going to go into that space. And there's probably hundreds of those inside of the Pentagon where individual activities take place and stovepiped in a way that one room doesn't know what another room is doing. And, it's a need to know basis. So these classified spaces were not accessible by the press corps. They've never been. So you apply to get a badge, you fill out a 1-2 page document, answering some questions, identifying that you understand the rules. Sometimes you'll get fingerprinted. You're going to get a badge, and that badge allows you to come and go inside of the Pentagon. It also allows you in the unclassified spaces, the hallways, the chow hall, the vending machines, the coffee area. There's a courtyard in the middle, a little garden, things like that. The May 2025 leadership started requiring escorts for pressers that had heretofore had freedom of movement in the unclassified spaces. And that was a prelude to some deeper changes. And those deeper changes came in the form of September 2025 this year. I don't know why I keep referring to the year. We're all 25. So the DOW circulates a draft policy. Remember, when you applied for your press pass, it was a 1 or 2 page document. Now, this was a 22 page document that they had to sign, acknowledging, and at this point it was draft, acknowledging that they were not allowed to solicit or publish unauthorized information. So imagine, if you will, you're a journalist whose job it is to perhaps investigate, at the very least, report on the news of the Department of War. And you are now being told that you are not allowed to ask any questions without prior authorization. And if you disseminate information that was not authorized for you to be told, it could be punitive. Even unclassified material. You have a thing that if you aggregate unclassified material enough, it can become classified, CUI. And it was this that they were trying to clamp down on, and again, they hadn't done it in the past. So a lot of people saw this as a bellwether, as a pivot towards a tremendous amount of editorial control. Well, the policy document comes out in October of 14, and it basically says that if you do not sign this document, you are not going to be allowed access to the building. You're not going to be allowed to ask any of the questions that you would normally be able to ask of the sources that you would typically get. You're not going to be allowed into the briefings, and it segues into the next day where 30 news outlets turn in their press passes in protest. And we're not talking about some small, little-known defense publications. And I want to pause here for a moment because there's no fly-by-night news organizations that were working out of the Pentagon. So whether they were smaller defense publications, small news outlets, or they were the big ones, they all left. We're talking Fox News, CNN, AP, Reuters. A lot of individuals left in protest because they refused to sign the policy document. It's kind of like the movie Dazed and Confused, where Randall Floyd refuses to agree not to smoke pot. He says, I may play ball for you next year, but I will never sign this. And that's kind of what happened. So the next day after these news outlets walked out, there essentially was no resident press pool. And there isn't. There were a lot of pictures and videos of the news reporters breaking down their offices and boxing everything up and basically walking out of the building. And it's I I think it's impactful. I think that the second and third order effects of controlling news access it's upsetting. It's unfortunate. And I am not one that is a fan of some of these news organizations. It's not my cup of tea. I'm not watching you, MSNBC. You are a horrible news outlet, but I respect the hell out of your right and your privilege, along with everyone else, to report whatever it is that you see fit. I mean, that is one of the things that makes our country so amazing, is a freedom of speech, freedom of press. And I love the transparency. I want the good, the bad, and the ugly. I like the hearing about the new technology that's coming out from the Department of War. I also want to know what new defense policies that we're shifting towards. And without resident press access, oftentimes that is delayed or sometimes impossible completely. So there's a lot of changes that this policy document forced. A lot of the news outlets are still going to continue to report. They're just going to do it off-site, and it's going to drive a lot more reporting underground, a lot more anonymous sources, and those people are probably going to be much more reticent to report because they are trying to lump some of the violations of the policy under the Espionage Act. That is a toothy act. So if you are found guilty of violating the Espionage Act, that is no small thing. In times of war, it can be grounds for the death penalty. In peacetime, you're never going to hold a security clearance again for the rest of your life, and you're probably not going to find work in a lot of places that you may have found work. So basic journalism right off the bat is neutered. It's going to cause a loss of institutional memory. The press pool that worked there was a way of doing business. They had particular individuals that they would go to get answers to things that they knew. So if it was, naval policy, they knew who to speak to. If it was air power, if it was procurement, there was access in all of the various disciplines in order to bring the stories to the American people. Gone. That goes with them as soon as they walked out of the building. You're also talking about the Pentagon, which is, again, it's the largest office building in the world. A lot of people work there, and I mean a lot of people. You are now going to have weakened oversight of this enormous institution. What we used to enjoy was transparency. In my mind, as a former military and somebody who, as I'm sure you figured out, was intimately embedded with the press, or the press was embedded in me, phrasing, by the way, it weakens the oversight. And I don't think that's good for anyone. I don't think that having the narrative forced by a DOW is the right way to do business. You're going to have credential leverage. So if a press reporter, news, print, radio, whatever the case may be, if they publish something and DOW doesn't like it, then there's reprisals. It's a tit for tat, and that's not how our free press is supposed to work. It's not how it has worked. It is not how it should work. We are supposed to be that shining city on the hill, the example for the rest of the world. There's a lot of things that we do that I am absolutely convinced that we're the best at. And then there's some things that are middle of the road, and there's some things that we just could probably improve upon, or definitely need to improve upon. So I think that having reprisals for the press report something that's really un-American. And of course there's First Amendment rights that are at risk, and this is going to be adjudicated. It's going to be adjudicated in the courts. It's already working its way up. One of the things that people are worried about, especially under the current climate, is what is this going to do to other organizations, other governmental organizations? Is this going to be seen as a precedent? Is, other governmental agencies going to take this example and say, well, you know what, we're going to control our press pool or our resident? If the press, there's the White House press correspondent, the White House correspondents, there's press individuals that are tasked or assigned. It's their news beat. for the U.S. Department of State or Maine Justice. I mean, there's a lot. And what is this going to do to everyone else under the Trump administration's tenor if this is successful and it's not put back in the bottle? I just wonder about it. So there are going to be legal challenges. It's definitely going to be interesting to watch. It is concerning for a lot of people. I think it's a bad move. I do. I don't understand. It's a little bit different if it was a private citizen who didn't want their life put in, they didn't want to live in a fishbowl and have every part of their life examined. But this is not an individual. We're talking to the Pentagon, and I think that transparency should be first and foremost in everything that the U.S. government does, but especially something like the military, which is such a massive arm of our diplomacy portfolio. It's not good. So keep an eye on that. I may end up talking about this the next week's SITREP. I'm not exactly sure. We're going to see how it develops, but that's troubling. That's troubling. So the other thing that took place, Booker's, by the way, if you're a fan of Kentucky bourbon, like I am, Booker's is tasty. No, I'm not getting an endorsement from anybody. I just talk about things I like, talk about things I don't like. And one of the things that I'm not super crazy about, or I don't like, is the fact that the Trump administration, it's not the administration, Trump himself, he publicly declared ongoing or upcoming CIA covert actions against Venezuela. And that was really shocking throughout the intelligence community, because when you're about to conduct covert action against another country, you don't typically telegraph it. So some people are thinking it's a bold move, and it was wise because it has the potential to shock the Venezuelan government and president, specifically Maduro, into possibly doing business differently. I don't know what that looks like, but I guess it's meant to intimidate him. And in many respects, it is going to intimidate him. But what it also does is it massively telegraphs your intentions. And when it comes to the CIA, letting people know ahead of time what your intentions are is fucking stupid, because it tethers and hobbles those case officers and other CIA individuals who have to work in that AO. It's going to make recruiting assets much harder. It's going to make managing assets much harder. It's also going to make plausible deniability a real bitch. If you get rolled up and the Venezuelan government says, well, we think you're a CIA spy, and you clutch your pearls and gasp and say, oh, there's no way. That's really hard when your own president has publicly announced that the CIA will now be conducting covert actions in Venezuela. So it's hard. I'm not exactly sure why it was done. And hey, I'm sure there was a reason. I'm just not privy to it. I don't swim in that pond. So, man, I hope there is. But my view and what I know is not something I was expecting. So already you're getting congressional oversight that is questioning the finding. In order to conduct covert actions, you have to have a finding. That's just, Title 50, Title 10 dynamics there. The U.S. military works a little bit differently. And speaking of U.S. military, there has been a lot more troop movements. Some chess pieces moved around the board. Some 10,000 Marines and ancillary equipment moved into Puerto Rico, which is fine. It's our territory. We're allowed to do that. But it's definitely forward deploying. One of the things that we don't have very much of is U.S. military bases in that part of the world. So about the best that we can hope for is Puerto Rico. So we're really pouring stuff down there at the moment, opening up an old naval base as well that had been shuttered for some 2 decades. And that's getting cracked open again. The Marines are there. There's some other hardware that's getting moved into the area. And a lot of people suspect that it is in anticipation of overt action instead of covert action. And that also becomes a real interesting thing, because the President's Wartime Powers Act allows him to do a lot of stuff, especially when it comes to the Marines. He can deploy the Marines for a certain amount of time without congressional approval. You can't do it conventionally without congressional approval, but he has some wiggle room with the Marines, and that's codified under an act of Congress. But land operations really blur the boundaries between covert intel activities and overt military action. So if there's a lot of documents that are out there on the relationship between Title 10 and Title 50, what truly falls within the covert realm and what falls within the military realm. But if you are conducting covert actions, oftentimes you're not going to conduct these covert actions if you don't have some kind of a reach back. And what I mean by that is, if you get into a pickle, somebody's got to come and save your bacon. And that is oftentimes U.S. military. So if you are conducting covert actions in a particular place in the world, you have to have an umbrella of support behind that. And oftentimes, as I said, that's going to fall into the U.S. military. So we have the potential for an incident where uniformed personnel have to go in and assist in a covert action in an extremist situation. I hope it doesn't happen, but there's a lot of interesting dynamics between that Title 10 and Title 50 happening. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to play out. I just I'm bringing it up in the course of this context. The other thing that it's doing is, of course, making some of the neighbors in the area pretty nervous. Colombia is recently the recipient of the administration's ire, while the $700-something million in aid to Colombia is threatened to be rescinded. I'm actually really annoyed that we give so much money in foreign aid to a lot of these countries anyways, but that's a topic for a completely different time. I know why we do it. It doesn't make it any less annoying. So there's some near-term strategic implications for decisions like this. It could mean that the Venezuelan government expels diplomats in a tit for tat. It could mean that they enable proxy harassment against the U.S. There are options for the Maduro's government if they want to exercise them. I hope that we don't. One of the things that it could drive them to do is to have closer, I don't know how much closer they could be, but closer cooperation with Moscow, Iran, and of course, Cuba. Not exactly our friends, and Moscow's kind of busy right now, so I'm not exactly sure what they are able to bring to the table, but don't count them out. Just because they're currently in an argument with Ukraine does not mean that they don't have intelligence assets that they can provide, and they will probably do that. Regional friction with neighbors. Again, I've already mentioned Colombia, but you've got Brazil, you have other Caribbean states, and don't forget the OAS, the American States, Organization of American States, which was founded back in 1948. And I want to say it's a group of 33, if memory serves, 32 or 33 countries in the hemisphere that are supposed to have cooperation, and they work together to create peace in the Americas. And they're definitely going to have a say in this. And in the backdrop of all of this, we continue to have kinetic attacks against drug boats, which I have no problem. I truly don't. You can strike all the Venezuelan drug boats you want. I don't want drugs coming into the country. And if you can destroy them wherever their vectors are, great, go for it. I don't think that the war on drugs a la Reagan, Nancy Reagan style is the answer, but quite honestly, that's one less shithead on the board. Great. No problems here. More the merrier. But I'm not super crazy about telegraphing covert operations in Venezuela, which could potentially drag us into more overt operations. I'm not exactly sure what the administration means when they say there could be potential land invasions. I don't know how that's going to work. I also will tell you that this kind of thing oftentimes does not result in regime change. In fact, more often than not, what it does is drive popular support and nationalism towards the country in question. So, Maduro has a tenuous hold on the country as it is. There's a lot of, upper class and lower class, no middle class, and there's a pretty strong division between the two. What this does, this existential threat, and this is true regardless of the country, when you have an existential threat, it galvanizes you. If you argue with your brother and sister, that's fine. But as soon as somebody attacks the family, your brother and sister, you guys are the best of friends to defend that external threat. And I think this is going to shore up a lot of support for Maduro, especially when, and it'll happen, especially when one of these covert operations is uncovered. Maybe not in its entirety, but I think at some point, we do enough of these, someone's going to get caught. The evidence is going to be found. I mean, it's just the nature of the game. It just happens. It's going to cause instability in the energy markets. I don't know what it's going to do to oil futures, but it's, something that it's out there. It's something that has to be considered. What is it going to do to maritime insurance premiums? I mean, it seems like that's the least that we would concern ourselves with here at home, but there is a market economy out there, whether we want it to be or not. And Venezuela is part of that market, and a disruption is going to have ripple effects on markets and commodities. So we'll see. I know there's going to be congressional oversight hearings. The Gag of Eight is definitely going to weigh in on it. We are going to probably hear from the European Union, definitely going to hear from OAS and some of the Latin countries that make it up. I would also expect that Venezuela could deploy littoral ships in some of its domestic waters, not at international, but definitely in where some of these strikes have taken place a little close to their waters. It could be testy. It could be interesting. So last but certainly not least, as I mentioned before, I think keep an eye out on whether they start expelling diplomats or U.S. citizens that work at the embassy. And that's going to be the first indication of a complete erosion of our diplomatic ties. And that's usually the last thing that happens before things go boom. So,
I don't know that you know this or not, but they did actually they did do an airstrike on Gaza.
Yeah. Israel did in retaliation for the Hamas anti-tank missile strike across the yellow line. So, I mean, Netanyahu was like, fuck around and find out. And they fucked around and found out. But I think it's going to completely detonate the agreement. I think it's weak. I give it to the end of the week, and I think they're back to fighting again.
I agree.
But the difference is that Hamas has absolutely no leverage on Israel this time. So before you had live hostages and you had the remains of the dead ones, doesn't exist anymore. So Hamas has no leverage.
Yeah, which means an endless war, basically.
No, it's not going to be endless at all. IDF is going to roll through and just steamroll that entire area. I mean, they outnumber Hamas. All you're going to do is just drive them into the ocean.
Sure. But it's just like any sort of, I do believe that you have any sort of force that they're going to apply is very sporadic, and it's never going to end. Basically, it's like, it's like a revolutionary force,
but as long as Hamas lives there.
Yeah, I
think it'll take a generation, and there won't be a Hamas.
Ultimately, what is your opinion of the amount of aid that we give Israel? Because that, even within the MAGA movement, I've been keeping track of like what people are talking about, and the amount of aid that's going to Israel and the amount of aid that is going to other foreign entities is becoming problematic for a lot of American citizens.
I mean, it's been problematic for me.
And when you look at war in general, and you look at specifically, say, Israel and Palestine, we're funding the war. And then you look at like what is going on in the U.S. and
I wouldn't say we're
whatnot.
funding it, but I understand your point. Giving them aid when they're in the middle of an armed conflict does make people scratch their heads. I get it, but we're not funding the war. Israel has plenty of their own economy. I don't like it. I think we give way too much foreign aid. I mean, this is globally. I mean, the amount of money that we pour, and I mean pour, into other countries is obscene.
This is an interesting, all right, angle. Let's look at specifically Venezuela, and we're bombing the drug boats. A lot of people think that there's an ulterior motive when it comes to oil specifically, which I would believe you could relate to.
I don't think oil is the ulterior motive, because Venezuela doesn't produce. Good.
He's been saying about ground. He's specifically talking about putting ground troops in Venezuela, and they have a massive oil reserve. And I'm just talking about what some of the jargon that is going on surrounding the actual events that are occurring. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's such a simplification to distill it to that. Anytime there's a large segment of our society that feels that anytime the United States fires a gun, it's because there's oil at the other end of it. And it's just not. It's not. There's things that I'm not going to publish in the podcast, but the agency is shifting its vision. It's towards narco-terrorism and technology. And I don't know exactly why, because I'm not in the room, but there is more to it than this. They're shifting towards narco-terrorism as a strategic and target. I can't connect the dots on that one. And it's not an oil-based thing, because there's other places that have much. Venezuela's fat, don't get me wrong, but there's something more under the surface, and I haven't been able to figure it out yet. Why the pivot for the CIA? Why are you targeting Venezuela of drug boats? Like, it's a weak fait accompli to say it's oil.
Yeah, I agree. It is interesting because there is a facet to it that is so unknown, and there's so much speculation surrounding it and so much ambiguity surrounding it. It's hard to determine what's what, because we do definitively know that the drug boat bombs are not relevant to what is actually, what the actual intention is.
Well, I mean, how much, if you're talking about stemming the flow of drugs, I mean, one drug boat, and I don't know how big these boats are, but they can't be carrying the volume to put really a dent in the drug flow problem.
Exactly. And that's exactly why there's another intention involved.
There is. And but I'm also not so, I don't want to use the word basic, because I'm trying to frame this the right way, but I think oil is an oversimplification. I have to believe that there's something more complex, because even if you force regime change, you're still buying Venezuelan oil. It's not like we're going to annex the country of Venezuela.
Yeah. I mean, then it just comes down to, how much are you controlling the asset, I mean, and that would directly reflect pricing and all of that stuff. But I mean, I understand. I totally agree with you. I mean, it's hard to figure, and that's the interesting part of it.
It is.
Okay. Go ahead. No, what were you going to say?
I'm saying I haven't heard anything from DNI, and that's a little interesting, because after Trump announced that he was going to conduct, or authorized the CIA to conduct, covert actions, nothing was, if there was, I didn't hear about it. nothing was said from the director of national intelligence about it and how they were going to organize it. You know, I know there had to have been a million questions from the press, and I just haven't heard the briefing. So, yeah, I don't know. I want to keep an eye on this story, and I want to probably circle back to it in a week and see where we're at, because that one is strategic.
I do think it's interesting how just seeing how the flow of information is presented, because the whole DoD thing was interesting with the press corps, how that was like really a predominant topic, and then it just kind of disappeared. You know, it really hasn't been expounded on in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it has in the social circles. I've been seeing a lot of information on social media about it.
For sure, but not within the own news cycle itself, which is directly affected by it, which is so fascinating to me.
No, I 100% agree. Yeah.
How information flows and what information is relevant. And, you know, now we're looking at psyops ultimately. You know, it's like, how do we deliver the information to the people, and the timing of that information, and what does that information mean ultimately? There's a distractionary element to it that is really fascinating. How it all works.
Yeah, I don't know if it was really just because we don't have a news cycle anymore. With 24-hour news, there is no news cycle like we had in the television broadcast days. And I don't know, there was just a new shiny thing, and the media kind of squirreled and looked over and went to chase that thing and left it alone. But like you said, it seemed to me, considering how many people left in protest, that it would be covered. It'll come back around. I think once, you know, it makes its way through the courts, there's going to be some appeals. They're definitely going to continue to pressure the DOW to make a change. So I think the story will come around again.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So pertaining to Evan Wright specifically, who was a journalist, who was embedded with you, who wrote a book specifically related to your experience at war and what you trained to do for, you know, years on end. How does this affect you personally within your own experience of having a journalist ride along with you in a very controversial war?
You know, I've had to defend a lot of the things that were said by the group, by me, and it's almost like the same organization that challenged why I said what I said is now adopting a policy of, we will tell you when you can say it and what you can say. And it's kind of a slap in the face, in the sense, like, you put a journalist in amongst us. No one asked. You told us that he was going to be with us. And then later, at 3 months later, when he reported everything that was done and said, you were furious about it. And it seems like we fast forward to today, and it's like, well, your answer now is, instead of getting mad, we're just going to control the narrative. And I think it's bullshit. Then what was the point, almost, right? Like, if you're going to control everything that is reported about your activities, then why report it at all? Just, you put out your own press release, publish a one-page paper every week about the things that you want to talk about.
State-run media.
I think it's a very, I don't want to say, it's dangerous, but I don't want to inflate it. I'm not saying like it's a constitutional crisis or this is the death of journalism in America or free speech is over. Like let's not do that. I don't want to do that. But I will say that this is important and it should not be ignored. And I think this is a dangerous precedent for the DOW to embark on.
Agrees. How did having a journalist ride with you from the quote unquote free press affect your experience?
It didn't change anything that I said, and it didn't change anything that I did. I made a decision when the whole thing started that my obligation was to the Marines under me and the left and the right. I wasn't going to change the way that I did business in any way, shape, or form because that person was there. So that was something that I made a decision very early on, and I stuck with it the entire time. Now, some people may question that, but it's from a practical matter, it's almost impossible for you to separate that individual from what you're doing. It's not like when the cameras are rolling on a reality TV show, you adopt this affectation, and then when someone says cut and the cameras are turned off, you're a different person. When it's a print journalist, you don't have that ability. That person is always there capturing everything you do. So you're going to almost go crazy trying to script your life to fit what you think the right narrative should be. So I threw that model out almost instantly. And I just did my job. I did my job as I saw it. And the war played out as it did. Documented along the way was in the background. And I let the chips fall where they may. So I like to think that it didn't truly affect my decision-making or my behavior. It affected some practical things like we're responsible for his safety. We have to make sure that he is fed. We have to give him, space amongst us. And, we have to, like I said, we have to protect him and take care of him. So if we're in the middle of a firefight, we have to be, hey, you stay down, move out of the way, things like that.
That being said, what do you think the value was having his perspective in the context of what went on?
I think anytime you have an objective observer to history, I think it's a positive thing. I will absolutely admit to mistakes that I made, mistakes that that 1st Recon Battalion might have made, the 1st Marine Division, and the Marine Corps, or the country at large. And I don't think that there's any shame or negativity in exposing, documenting, and sharing those mistakes. I don't feel that it is a bad thing anytime there is somebody there to be a witness to events, to be a witness to history, to answer your question. So I think it was positive in that sense. There probably should have been more of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great distillation of the complex nature of what we're talking about is like being a witness.
Yeah.
And I think that is ultimately what the press's role should be, ultimately, is that they're being a witness to what is actually happening. And in this day and age, the press has become more relevant to entertainment than it has become
to information,
to being a witness.
Yep.
And I think that therein lies the real problem with the press's involvement with like sensitive stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And the unfortunately, and there's justifications on both sides of the aisle for it. There has just been so many instances where the press has forgotten its objectivity and has allowed personal bias to cloud their reporting. And the second and third order effects of that are, I hate to say it, the Pentagon's decision to remove the press pool.
Yeah, which that has a lot. There's a lot of implications to that. And
Oh, there
like,
are
what do
huge.
you
Yeah.
see as the implications to that?
Well, I mean, I think we've said it already. So you lose an important witness to events. I think that you lose transparency. I think you lose immediacy. I think you lose the dissemination of information. The Pentagon is role is to protect the United States, well, at the behest of the civilian oversight, to protect the country, to protect the country's interest with lethal force. Why would you not want transparency for something that is so, potentially lethal, life-changing, history-making as the U.S. military? You don't want to document what's taking place. I can't understand it.
Yeah, I do think the only other argument that is taking place is that, we're dealing with very sensitive subject matter, and, that this is the story that's created by the opposing viewpoint, not reporting on confidential information is relevant to the protocol involved with, just executing whatever it is that they're trying to execute.
But it's not classified. No one's selling state secrets. The media asking, a major lieutenant colonel, lieutenant general a question on a subject that they may be uncomfortable answering is not, you're not selling. It's not Edward Snowden. I don't understand. What is the fear here? I think that the organization as a whole has a lot of successes that can be celebrated by publishing them. And if there's things that you simply don't want divulged, they're not going to get divulged. I'm telling you that the work that takes place behind the skiff doors doesn't reach the press's ears unless somebody leaks it, unless someone leaks it. So if you're really that worried about it, then you need to look inward and not outward.
Yeah. No, that's good. I like that.
That is absolutely enough to keep all of us busy for the next couple of days as we watch these develop. And that's the nice thing about the world. It's always melting down. So there'll be a fresh pile of shit to talk about next time. Until then, I am the Iceman. As always, stay frosty and like and subscribe.